So I didn't. Anyway, like I said, my name is Brian. I've been a varying levels of IT technical hiring manager for about 8 years. I work at Atmosera right now. We're a cloud hosting provider for the most part. Do a lot of work with Microsoft Azure, which was what your talk was originally going to be at, or about. That got changed. So, a few things that I wish everyone knew when applying for technical work, and a lot of these honestly apply to most jobs, but I'll go over them from a technical perspective. The first thing of which is when you're applying for a job, the only thing that the company knows about you is what's on your resume. Don't typo. If I'm hiring for tech workers who don't know how to use spell check, which is automatic in almost everything these days, I'm unimpressed. And depending on the volume of applicants for the job, yeah, sometimes, I'll load it in Word if there's a bunch of red underlines. Yeah. Enough said. So yeah, first one, run it through spell check. The other thing is, develop your resume, and then review it yourself, send it to a friend or three, have them review it, and then make sure that they didn't typo on it. I can't really overemphasize the importance of the resume, getting it, looking good, accurate, and not having technical errors in it if you're applying for a technical position. You should know how to use Word if you're applying as a programmer. Also, so you're going to have kind of your base skill set of, different programming languages that you're familiar with, different Microsoft environments that you've worked with, your kind of base skill set, which definitely needs to be on the resume. It's very important. But what you want to think about and kind of look to highlight is the things that make you different from everyone else who has those same skills. Pretty much anyone who's qualified to be applying for a position with, the skills that you're applying for has them. So do certainly have the skills, languages, certifications, whatever you have on there. Definitely have those, but try to find a way to demonstrate in one page in a very small amount of space how much better you are than everyone else who has those same skills. It's hard, but it's one of those things that as a hiring manager, when you're looking through 80 resumes, you're not really looking for the base skill set. You're looking for what makes people stand out from everyone else with those skill sets. When it's hardest to do when you're taking on your first technical job, because you won't have a lot of background, a lot of projects that have been successful. So if you're trying to break into the tech field, if you can highlight special projects that you did while you were learning, even projects that you've done outside of class, if you volunteered at a nonprofit and made something really cool for them, highlight that. Your accomplishments. If you've been in the field for a while, then that makes it a little bit easier. You'll have more experience, more accomplishments to draw from. And once you've been in the field for a little while, the types of accomplishments in particular that are impressive are ones that you can attach a dollar figure to. So, for example, if a company that you are working for needed you to code a new way of handling purchase orders, because most companies don't have an amazing purchase order process, they would all like a better one. If you can make that for them, then you can demonstrate how many hours of payroll that they have saved based on your work. That's huge for hiring managers, that this employee is going to come in and make the company money. Likewise, if you were put on, a marketing campaign and personally contributed something new and unique to that, and you have the results from that campaign, put numbers on there. Again, you're trying to differentiate your value to the potential employer that's different than everyone else with your skill set. It's tricky, not going to lie. And the last thing that I'll go over as far as the resume and initial application kind of goes back to the review and revise. Just make sure that you're communicating clearly and effectively. Resumes are, on the one hand, kind of dumb because it's like, tell me everything about you on one page, which is ridiculous, but it's how we work. So, be clear, concise, and communicate as much useful information in a small amount of space as you can. That in itself is a useful skill, but if you can apply that to your resume, it will help. So, moving on in the process, if your resume was read and received well, hopefully you get an interview. There's a few different kinds of interviews. In the tech world, there's kind of the general, first screening interview. Tell me about yourself. What animal would you be if you could be an animal? Super useful things like that. Don't know why those happen, but they do. And then there's also some technical interviews where, especially in or at the coding academy, is that right? They may ask you for code samples, but those won't generally be your first interview. So interviews, they are designed specifically to be scary. They're, again, tell me everything about you in 30 minutes. They're almost as ridiculous as resumes, but again, it's what we have to do. One thing that really helped me learn to interview better was actually to interview a bunch of people. And the thing that I learned through that process is that when you're being interviewed, you have one job, and that's to talk about yourself and be honest. We all have lots of years experience being ourselves. It's made to look and sound hard, but it's not. You have a fairly easy job. The person giving the interview has to evaluate you versus everyone else that's interviewing. And those kinds of hiring decisions impact, of course, the person who's applying. It impacts the team that they're applying into, and it impacts, the people who do and don't get that job. As well as, if you're the hiring manager, it impacts your life if you hire the wrong guy. So it may help in interviews to remember that the other people have a harder job than you do. It might not also, but it's worth keeping in the back of your mind. If you haven't been through a lot of interviews, I recommend grabbing a friend and practicing. It's awkward to do with friends, practice-wise, but just have a list of, Google a list of common interview questions and have somebody ask you those questions. Get some practice answering them in a low-pressure environment. Like I said, it will be awkward having your friend interview you, but it helps you, practice makes perfect in interviews. So the more practice you have ahead of time, the better. Strongly recommended. And while you're Googling kind of common interview questions, develop answers for them. Some of the really first Google results you'll find is, tell me some of your strengths, tell me some of your weaknesses. And then all the rest of the Google results will be people's blog posts on how to answer those. Don't read those blog posts. Answer them honestly, as you would normally. It's kind of clear interviewing people if they're giving you completely canned responses, because we read Google. those questions also, generally speaking, the answers that we're looking for, we're not looking for a particular answer, yes or no wise, but we are looking for, shall we say, job relevant answers. So what are my greatest strengths? Well, I'm an amazing basket weaver. I don't care. I'm hiring you to fix computers. So keep in mind when you're doing practices and during the interviews that they're looking for job relevant answers there, and that includes sometimes questions are phrased poorly. So tell me about yourself. They don't really want to know about you. They want to know about your work experience and how you can help solve some problem that they're having, either technically or just staffing, getting people in there to do the job that whatever it is that the company does. One that I had to emphasize with a friend recently. So this spring I was working with a startup that closed, and so all of us went out interviewing. I had a friend who got fairly far along in the interview process and then somewhat abruptly dropped from a company that he was applying to, and I'm like, hey, what happened there? And he's like, well, they said that I was underdressed. And I'm like, were you in a t-shirt and jeans? And he's like, yeah. Come on! Which, in his defense, he was, he could wear on the job previously, so maybe it didn't occur to him. It's an interview. It's the only thing that this company knows about you. I would say, it's more detrimental to underdress for an interview than overdress. In the Pacific Northwest, in particular, we're very casual for the most part. Not a lot of ties in offices, which is fantastic. I love that. But also, even if it's a super casual office environment that, you did some research, you know something about, if the people walking around working there who already have the jobs are in t-shirt and shorts, don't wear that to your interview. And exactly what that means to you is up to you, but just be aware that the interview is kind of like the resume. It's a very small amount of time and kind of experience that you can throw at making yourself look good and convincing the people that you're serious about the position. And once you have it, flip-flops and shorts, I don't care. Nobody cares, usually. However, treat the interview differently. When people show up to interviews who don't look like they're taking the interview serious, I'm going to assume that they're not going to take their job seriously. And that kind of relates to the typos on resumes. If the one job that they're doing for me is giving me a decent resume that tells me about themselves and they can't put any effort into it, then, when they have 10 jobs in front of them, I'm going to assume that they have the similar work ethic. Let's see. Okay. So, assuming that you've done all of those things right, then the hiring manager is going to be comparing you to some other people who may have everything right also. I've had to hire for many roles where all of the candidates were great. Some of them were better than others, but frequently it came down to a handful, 2 or 3 candidates that I liked the resume, they interviewed well, and I only have one opening, so I have to pick somebody. In that case, it frequently is going to come down to cultural fit, which is the fancy corporate speak for, does the manager like you, and do they think that you will fit well with the team? Some of those are going to come down to coin tosses. You're not going to get all of them. Don't be discouraged. There's, in most individual openings, there's going to be more applicants than positions. So in those cases, certainly if you don't get a job, it's worth a follow-up to the manager. Hey, I understand you had to pick somebody. Was there something I could have done better? A lot of times you'll get an answer back, no, everything was great. I just, had to pick one, and somebody else's personality-wise seemed to be a better fit. And even that is a hard call as the hiring manager because in interviews people are, trying to look as good as possible. on their best behavior, and some people are better about lying about themselves than others. So it's point is, don't be discouraged if something just happened. There's a position that everything else went well for. You don't get. Sometimes it's just culture, it's just personality, sense of humor, mannerisms. You never know. There's a lot of kind of nuance there that you don't have any control over whatsoever. And the last thing that I have on my notes is while you're looking for tech positions, or really any, engage your social network, and I do not mean Facebook. Classmates, people that you know, that you've been in classes with, people that you've worked with before. Talk to people, see what's available where they're working. The majority of the positions that I have taken have been at companies where I knew somebody. Not all of them, but it's huge. It kind of comes back to that cultural fit in an environment, and also the trying to pack a large amount of information into a resume or an interview. If a company already knows your history and your personality, and that you will fit with at least some of their employees, that's more than they will know about a lot of applicants. So ask around, see who's hiring, who you know, friends, family, neighbors, whatever, former coworkers. There might not be something that they can help with right then, but there might be later. And if they're kind of keeping that in the back of their mind, say, hey, I've taken some classes, this is what I'm looking for, which can be done on Facebook, but however you talk to your friends, talk to them. It's a huge benefit. If as a hiring manager, if I have a stack of resumes that deep, and a coworker of mine says, hey, take a look at this one. Okay, I will. And there's a lot of ones that I'll thumb through for typos and stuff. But that one, if somebody tells me they're a good guy, they've worked with them before, they trust them, then assuming that they have at least some of the relevant skills, they're probably at least going to make it to the interview step. Just from history and kind of reliability, trust. So I strongly encourage you, use your contacts, use your friends. Goes a long ways. So I've had since mid-afternoon Wednesday to prepare for this talk. So I'll open it up for questions and hope that you have a lot. Yes?
So GitHub portfolios, is that the thing that's you'd recommend?
Portfolios?
So for like a software developer having stuff on GitHub.
Yes. So that's partly with the note that I haven't been directly hiring developers, but if you have, that kind of extends your resume. So your resume is, I worked on these and these projects, and if you want to check them out, here they are. You can download them. You can look at my code. You can see kind of how I think when creating a project. I would say that's extremely helpful from the standpoint of, anybody can type anything on a resume. I can go home to my resume, tell people that I've been governor of Oregon for 12 years. They can Google that and figure out that I haven't been, but I can put it on there. And if you have something that you can prove that they can go out and check easily, and then, like I said, review the work, I would say that would be a good idea.
Of course, caution people not to put an employer's software on. It'd be personal projects maybe that you work on. Right?
Yes, personal projects. That those can borrow skills that you have learned on the job. Certainly, there's a lot of that going on. So technology is a huge field. It's any number of possible jobs, and networking, coding, running cabling is technically sort of technology. So yeah, if you can prove if you can demonstrate your work, then that would be a thing that as a hiring manager, I would like to see for sure. If you're taking your company's intellectual property and posting it on the internet, I would also like to see that for different reasons. But there's a lot of, you carry the skills that you learn on the job with you throughout your career. And if you're not learning as you go and kind of accumulating a skill set, then you should be. So that's a little bit of a fine line, but that's a very good question. Yes, post it, but make sure it's your work and you're allowed to post it. Anybody else? Sure.
So, different people have an opinion on this, just like you get your opinion.
Sure.
The idea of putting a reference letter in with your resume. The idea is, well, you've got a one-page resume. Great. If it sparks some interest, maybe the hiring manager would bother them looking at your reference letter.
In my experience as both a manager and an occasional applicant, references usually come towards the end. There's a few things about references. Number one is people aren't going to give you references that are bad, generally. So as the manager, I'm mostly looking at the resume, go through some interviews.
I'm actually talking about a letter of recommendation.
Oh, letter of recommendation?
Yes.
Gotcha. Sorry, I thought. Yeah, same thing, I think. For my experience, that would be later on down the line. And as a hiring manager, I would still want to give that reference a call. Hey, thanks for the letter. It's a great recommendation. Anything you can add about this candidate? Because again, I can, in Word, I can say that I'm any of my former managers and give you that. It's dishonest. I haven't done that. I will never do that. But I'm also pretty sure that there are some people out there doing that for jobs. So that would fall under, ultimately, as the hiring manager, if you have a good letter of recommendation, great. If you're one of the final candidates, I will read that. I will follow up on it. It is a good resource for the hiring manager to learn more about you, and more importantly, to verify some of the things that you've been saying. But I wouldn't be reading it as part of the initial resume sorting, who gets an interview, who doesn't process. Me personally. There's also a lot of, depending on the size of business that you're working with, your resume is frequently either scanned briefly by HR, who's not going to read the letter of recommendation, or at bigger scale like your Nikes and Intels, those are actually read by a computer, and they're looking for keywords in the resume itself, and if it ever makes it to HR, you've already gone through a lot of the screening, but the computers, the automated systems that they use at their scale, don't care about your references. So it doesn't hurt to have some. Probably not going to help in the very first stages. It could later, so they're worth having for sure. Yes, sir.
Curious, of the soft skills, are there any particular that come to mind that you find people generally are weak on?
Soft skills. So the question for the internet was about soft skills and what I find people missing soft skill wise. So I'll break that up into a couple pieces. In the interview process, so once a resume is of interest to me, depending on the role and candidates, sometimes I will be doing a phone screening with people first because I have 15 resumes that look good. I'm not going to sit down for in-office interviews for 15 people. So I want to just talk to them, have a 10-minute conversation, ask them why they're interested in the position, maybe a little bit of background and history. What I'm actually doing for most of those is seeing if they're a clear and concise communicator. Can I talk to these people? In the tech world, well, probably in all industries, but in the tech world in particular, a lot of us are naturally shy. I, for example, am not excited about public speaking. You're welcome. And thank you. And one-on-one conversations is it's a unique skill, but it's an important one. And for the hiring process, I would say that the more that you can just practice having conversations and speaking, not on Facebook, the better. We all are used to talking to our friends. Have conversations with store clerks. They can't go anywhere. They can't get mad at you. Just get used to talking to strangers about whatever. So for the interview process, your biggest soft skill that can make or break your application process is smooth conversation, basically. If I have to struggle to try to glean the point that you're trying to make because you ramble like I do, then we're going to take up a lot of the phone conversation because only one side of that call should ramble, and I call it dibs. On the job, so once you have a job though, and I'll say that this won't apply to any of you because you're here, you're building your skill set, but there's kind of two different types of work ethic that show up on the job. The first and most obvious of which is, are you doing your job in a timely manner? The tech workers in general have I think mostly undeserved, but they do have a reputation of being lazy. There are those people out there who they went into technology because it seemed easy, and that's what they're looking for in a career. They're going to be greatly disappointed, and so are their managers. So I would say, getting the things done that you're supposed to be doing, which is way easier to say than to do, I understand. And then the other skill that it takes longer to show up if you're deficient in it on the job, but that's continual learning. If you go into a job with a specific skill set that was sufficient to get you that job, by 6 months down the road, the company is probably doing something else or using that technology in a totally new way. So you want to always be learning. Ask your coworkers what they're doing. Take classes. You guys are all doing good. Read articles on whatever specialty you're going into. Because if you don't, then eventually that will come out in your work quality because while you started out good, they're going to ask different things of you. Every single job description I've ever seen has other duties as assigned. If you're going in as a programmer, that might mean they need you to look into some network issues. If you're a technical support manager, they might send you downtown to do lunch speaking. They might, let's see. Oh, so we have some kind of tier 1 help desk people that get to walk our data centers to make sure that people who aren't supposed to be there aren't there, and periodically run cable. They'll be utilized as one of the larger labor forces to run fiber in the data center. Not what they signed up for, not what we were looking for on their resume, but it's the thing that the company needs from them. And all of my crew have been very, willing and able, but it's that on-the-job learning. I know how to fix computers. I don't know anything about fiber optics, but if we can teach them, great. We have that gives the company more resources. We don't have to pay, low voltage electricians to run fiber optics because there's no voltage there. And the employee learns a new skill. Now he can run fiber, so if he wants to run fiber from one end of his house to the other, he knows how to do it. I'm one of those nerds that I ran fiber in my house, is why I mentioned it. So, yeah, to sum up, big soft skills while you're applying, I would say, is communication. And once you're on the job, working and ongoing learning. So those continuation of skills managers like to see. Excellent question. Oh, I'll add, while I'm still here, real quick. As a manager, not as a hiring manager, but as you already have the job and I'm your manager now. Sorry about your luck. One thing that I love out of my employees is good, engaging questions, like that one. You know, if they're running into a problem with some task that's been assigned to them, and they have some question about the background and maybe that they're thinking about better ways to do stuff, questions are very good. And you will, throughout your career, run into managers who don't like being asked questions, and I'm sorry about those. But I'm not, so I like questions. You had one, I think?
How would you recommend going about answering a question, during an interview? How would you go about answer a question that you don't know the answer to, whether it be a technical
lie? I recommend not lying. So if it's a technical question, there's a couple ways to go about it. First is say that you don't know, and follow that up with but I have worked on this related thing, and there, in that situation, I was able to solve a similar problem by doing this. If you're asked a question just completely way out of your field, the only answer you can really give them is, I don't know, but I can certainly find out for you. They don't expect you to know everything, but they may be prodding to see how you react to things that you don't know. Some people just get flustered and I go, I don't know. And that's the end of it. But if you can say, I don't know, but I would start investigating by, reading, finding resources, Google, obviously. That's how we solve everything. So that's probably, if it's a question that's way out of the position that you're applying for, it's probably to see how you handle, number one, the stress, and number two, to get insights onto how you would go about learning new things. Because again, whatever skills you have will change in short order, so they're going to want to see how you react to that. So I would use that as an opportunity to demonstrate that you know some specific resources to look at, different websites that they may have heard of relating to that position, or where Powell's Books is. Yes.
As a hiring manager, have you ever hired someone that doesn't meet all of the job requirements that are listed in the job description?
Yes, probably half. As background for that, though, the majority of my hiring has been for IT generalists. So, I need a guy who can do networking, who can do routers, who can do servers, who can do desktops, who can do Wi-Fi. And there are those people out there who can do who have all of those skills, but there's not a lot of them. So what I'm usually looking for is a person who has a fair amount of the skills, and by having quite a few of the skills, they have demonstrated that they can learn new things, and that I can, teach them the rest. Depending on the exact position that you're going into, there will be some things that you will only learn on the job. For example, for 6 years, I was the IT manager at the Oregon Coast Aquarium in Newport, and large portion of that job was trying to mix electronics and saltwater. They don't mix, but that's the short version. But if in the job description, if I had put must know how to handle electronics next to salt water, there's, nobody can do that because they don't make, not at those budgets anyway. And so, yeah, having enough related skills is good enough. So if they have a list of 10 requirements in the job description, what they mean is 10 things that they would really like to see. Apply anyway. With if you've got 6 of them and can say something about the rest of them, even if it's not I've done this on the job, but it's I'm aware of how this works. You don't have to tell them it was from a 3-minute YouTube video. If you can say something about those missing skills, either on the resume, in interviews, what have you, then that's a go for it anyway. If you have one of the 10 skills, save yourself the time and trouble. But I'd say if you have half of the skills and it's a position that you're interested in and you feel comfortable learning the rest of the skills, then be aware that they may find candidates that have all the skills, and so their resume is going to wind up on the top. Don't get discouraged by that. Find a position that more closely matches your skills, or a company that's willing to take your resume as is for other reasons. It's a good question. Thank you. Give me something to talk about. I like that. Yes.
Different environment. I'm not in the IT background. I mean, hiring somebody for that eventually. But if you run across somebody who's rather sarcastic and snarky.
That's all of us, yes.
My response is obviously a little different. I'm sure you were expecting, so maybe you might want to pass it on to the kids here. Okay, it's going to happen.
Yes. So you're talking about specifically during the interview process?
Right.
Yeah. Good question. So, again, for those on the internet who didn't hear it, there's a question about, we'll say, communication styles. Tech workers have a tendency, a totally deserved reputation for being sarcastic, and try to avoid that in interviews. The people that you're interviewing with aren't, as just mentioned, aren't necessarily tech workers themselves. May not share your dry sense of humor or love of nerdy jokes. They might, but find that out later. And carefully. So sarcasm in particular is like my first language. But in business situations, interviews and emails in particular, those 2 areas, you want to be clear and speaking in business terms, which is not sarcastic. No sense of humor at all, just assume that. If that's not the case, find out later and carefully. But yeah, take the interview and the resume and any email correspondence that you have with the company in between those seriously. Sarcasm does not transfer well over email at all. Even with colleagues that you know to be conversationally sarcastic, shall we say, that a lot gets lost when it's put into text. With your friends, it's probably fine because they're just expecting it. But with colleagues and managers, try to avoid that. And interviews in particular, kind of like, don't dramatically underdress for an interview. Don't dramatically lower your communication skills under the expected business talking language, I guess. For a lot of reasons, but generally speaking, because you have a very small window to make a good impression and to demonstrate that you're taking the job seriously, which is exactly what sarcasm, that's the opposite of what sarcasm does for you. And I say that seriously, with no sarcasm. Good point.
do you expect to have some knowledge of financial part of what they do, or like for example, a cost benefit analysis, or just so they understand the full picture?
Yeah. It depends on the role. I would say that, sorry, for the internet, hi internet. The question was about essentially how valuable is it for candidates to have an understanding of the financial implications of their job. Cost benefit analysis was mentioned, and the answer is it depends. The further up the corporate food chain or the more senior the position is, the more important it's going to be that they have at least an understanding of how their work impacts the company's revenue. The thing to remember about corporations, the thing that they like is money. So if you can demonstrate that you understand how you are making them money, that's a very good thing. And the sliding scale I kind of mentioned is if you're hired to reboot desktops, kind of tier 1 help desk stuff, it doesn't matter that much. But if you're hired as a business analyst, then that's most of your job. And all the ground in the middle between those, the more you're aware of kind of revenue and customer impact from your job, how it fits in the business as a whole, the more valuable you will be, because you can direct your energies and perhaps those of your teammates into more valuable areas and more valuable efforts and utilization of skills than if you're focused entirely on, man, this is the best code I've ever written. Great, it doesn't make any money. Nobody cares. If instead you're like, this is really good code and we can use it to generate revenue, then that will help your career for sure. And if you can demonstrate that on the resume and in interviews, then it will go a long ways towards helping your chances. Kind of having that bigger picture, because the technology itself that you're working on is a means to an end, and the end is generally revenue. So, good question. Yeah.
Say you get hired, right? There's always that first few months process where you're getting to know the employee. What have you seen where you've told somebody to let go because the first 6 months you didn't like them, or what are things not to do on the job once they've gotten it and they're new? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I haven't had to let anybody go in the first 6 months, mostly because I've been lucky during the interview process. I can't chalk it up to skill. It was just a combination of skill and luck. So the first 6 months on the job, that's a lot of, there's kind of two things going on there. One is understanding the technical side of the role. So what is it that you're doing for the company? And then the other one is the corporate culture and how you fit in that and how to communicate with your team. If your team is all, gamer programmers, then by all means, your first order of business is probably be as sarcastic as you can with everybody, because then they'll like you more. If you're in a financial institution, where most of your colleagues are in suits and ties, then you're going to want to recognize that quickly and the distinction between those environments, and learn to get along with your team and your managers. And a lot of that's going to come down to communication styles, potentially dress codes, and how fast you can learn. If generally speaking, I recognize that when somebody comes into a position, Even if they have the list of 10 required skills, every environment is different. They're going to have to learn. And if they're doing that at a reasonable rate, then great. We'll have patience with them. In my mind, it's on the company to have some sort of training program for new employees in place. It's potentially worth asking about during interviews. But yeah, culture, company fit, communication with teammates, and just picking up those skills that you need on the job are going to keep you out of the 6-month getting let go cycle. And if it does happen, then you probably dodged a bullet, because that way you'll be miserable till you find a new job instead of miserable for the next 10 years. So if the cultural fit isn't there, I understand all too well the need to have money. Rent and stuff doesn't really care if you didn't fit in with the last job. So it's definitely good, but if you're doing all that you can to fit in the culture, learn the job, and you still get let go, then you probably wouldn't have been happy there, either due to an actual cultural mismatch or because the manager just plain didn't like you, which would also not be good for your mental health long term. Some managers are jerks. Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
So this is kind of a long question, but have you hired people that have graduated from boot camp or with a boot camp background? And if so, what kind of traits do you see that stand out versus those who hadn't gone to a boot camp?
Sure. That's a very relevant question. The really quick answer is no, I haven't, but the longer explanation there is I haven't been hiring coders. I've been hiring more IT, the network, servers, desktops, that kind of thing. So different skill set. However, still similar principles will apply that I went over before, where you went to the boot camp, you have the skill set. It's the same skill set that everyone else who went to the boot camp had. What you will want to try to do is differentiate yourself from your classmates. In some way, outside of the class, you've been working on your own projects. You've been posting them on GitHub. You've been, getting certifications based on your experience in the boot camp. You've been, whatever kind of learning, job experience that you can, that's going to differentiate you. Number one, make sure it's on the resume and spelled correctly. And number two, be actively going out and pursuing that type of work. So that was a good question. All right. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I can turn the mic off now.